Welcome, and thanks for joining us for today's ASA webinar, Alzheimer's Caregiving During the Holidays, which is part of the Family Caregiver Support Series sponsored by Homestead, Inc. We will be getting started shortly. The slides for today's presentation are available under the tab on your screen labeled Resources. And under the tab labeled CE Application here, you will find information on how to obtain CE credit for this event. You will have 60 days to complete a continuing education application. It may take up to 30 days from the date of your application in order for us to process and issue your CE credit. If you are not logged in directly to this webinar, that is, if you're watching as part of a group and did not log in using an individual confirmation URL, you will not be eligible for continuing education credit because we have no way to track your online attendance. If you'd like to receive continuing education credit, please be sure to log in using a confirmation URL you received after individually registering. If you have questions during the presentation, you can send those anytime using the questions box, and we will save those for the last 10 to 15 minutes of today's program. And now we would like to welcome today's presenter, Lakelyn Hogan. This is a gerontologist and caregiver advocate for Home and Stead Senior Care and a doctoral candidate at the University of Nebraska, Omaha, studying social gerontology. She has a Master of Arts in Social Gerontology and a Master's in Business Administration from UNO. Lakelyn has a professional experience in the private and public sectors of senior care services. Lakelyn?
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I cannot believe that we're already in the month of December. Each year when I plan out these series, I always think, wow, December is so far away, but here we are. So I want to thank you all again so much for joining us. Again, my name is Lakelyn Hogan. I'm with Home and Stead Senior Care, but you'll notice we have a new logo. We are changing our name to simply just Home Instead, and we have a new logo. So you'll see that throughout the presentation. We're very excited about this next step for our organization. We've been around for 26 years, and so it was time for a little bit of a fresh look. So you can feel free to check out our website for more information, but did want to note that quick change. But again, welcome everyone. Happy holidays. This year, our holidays are going to look very different because of the pandemic and COVID-19. And we know that the holidays can generally be a stressful time for everyone, especially family caregivers. Caregivers are stressed no matter what time of year. We see about 60% of those that are caring specifically for those living with dementia, they are expressing higher emotional stress and strain because of that caregiving role. So then you add the stresses of the holidays, you add the stresses of caregiving during a pandemic. And this is supposed to be, the most wonderful time of the year, but this year things are going to look a little bit different, but it doesn't mean that we can't still enjoy some of our holiday traditions or make modifications to include those living with Alzheimer's and other dementias and their caregivers. So I'll overview our objectives quickly here on the next slide. We're going to start by just reviewing the basics of Alzheimer's disease and other types of dementia. And I do that just so we're all on the same page. I'm just going to do a quick overview. Then we'll talk about some of the stresses and strain that can arise for caregivers during this holiday season. And then I'm going to be talking about a person-centered approach to tailoring the holiday festivities for individuals living with dementia. Person-centered care really is the gold standard for care and support for those living with dementia. And so we'll talk more about that. Then I'm going to talk about some purposeful and engaging holiday activities. I'll be providing examples throughout the presentation on that. And then also I'm going to be covering, the CDC recommendations for holiday gatherings this year, because I think it's an important reminder for all of us, and especially for caregivers as they're trying to weigh, do we get together with family, do we not? Sometimes it can be helpful to have the guidance of those professionals. And then I'll leave you with some resources towards the end. So while we're talking about, Alzheimer's caregiving, sometimes it's important to just do a quick refresher on the Dementia Basics. So dementia is a decline in mental ability that's severe enough to interfere with daily life, and it's not a normal part of aging. Sometimes people think that, losing your memory and having cognitive issues is normal, and there are some aspects of that can be normal with age, forgetting where your keys are, but eventually being able to retrace your steps, or forgetting someone's name, but eventually it coming back to you. That's not abnormal, but it's when a person's never able to retrace their steps to find their keys, or never remember that person's name, when we need to get that individual in for an evaluation, because it might be that there's some sort of cognitive decline happening. But dementia is really that umbrella term for the various types. And so we know Alzheimer's disease is the most common type of dementia. There's frontal temporal, vascular dementia, Lewy body, but then there's also mixed dementia, where a person can have multiple types of dementia. So today we're talking more specifically about Alzheimer's disease, mainly because it's the most common form of dementia, and Alzheimer's disease develops because of microscopic changes in the brain over time. You can see on the picture on the right, there's plaques and tangles that form that really block the communication between nerves, and so those nerves begin to shrivel up and die, and the brain begins to shrink. And so the picture on the left, you can see a healthy brain versus a brain with Alzheimer's disease. And you can see that there's some enlarged ventricles, there's atrophy of the cerebral cortex, and the hippocampus is smaller. And I like to show this picture, especially when I'm talking with family caregivers, because it's important to remember that Alzheimer's disease is a disease that impacts the brain. And it is those changes in the brain that cause what we call dementia-related behaviors. And sometimes, especially when we're getting together with family, maybe family hasn't seen the individual living with dementia for several months, it can be hard to understand why mom or dad, aunt or uncle, sister or brother is acting differently than they once did. And again, that's because the brain is literally changing. It's deteriorating because of the dementia, the type of dementia that they have. So that can be just a good reminder for family caregivers as they're trying to explain to their loved ones, why mom or dad is acting different. It really is that the disease is impacting their brain, which is impacting their ability to think and reason, and then also changing some of their behaviors. And we know that Alzheimer's disease is typically found in about 3 stages. Sometimes you'll see 5. I like to simplify it. So we have early, middle, and late. So in early Alzheimer's disease, an individual may still be fairly independent for the most part. They might need extra reminders or verbal and nonverbal cues. You might see more sticky notes around the house. And in this stage, I often hear people living with dementia that are in early stage, they say, people will tell me I don't look like I have dementia, or I don't really act like I have dementia. But they themselves and those that are close to them are starting to notice that there are some cognitive issues in that early stage. Then in more of that middle stage is when you start to see those changes in behavior. An individual is likely to need more assistance in their daily care needs for their ADLs, their IADLs, and they'll start to have communication challenges. They might not recall words or names as easily as they once did. They may also just have a little more trouble or need a little more time to take in information, process the information, formulate a response, and speak that response out. Sometimes in this middle stage, I'll see, people wanting to engage in conversation, but if the individual isn't responding to the question right away, they just dismiss it and move on. When if the person were to ask the individual living with dementia a question and then just pause, 8 to 10 seconds, it may seem like an eternity, but that might just be the time the person needs to formulate a response and then speak that response out. Again, the brain is changing. It just needs a little more time and effort. So that can be another good reminder to families during the holiday season, is maybe just ask maybe more simple questions, or make sure to ask one question at a time instead of asking, multiple questions, but then allow the person time to respond. And I think that families with little tips like that to loved ones, again, that might not interact with the person as regularly, that can help foster a more enjoyable holiday experience. And then we see people progress into the late stages of dementia, and that's where you really see a decline in physical health. You see difficulties with eating and swallowing, and communication becomes pretty limited in this stage. Eventually, typically the person loses their ability to communicate in general, and there is no cure at this time for Alzheimer's disease, so the person will eventually pass away from Alzheimer's disease or complications from the disease. So again, it can be hard for family members to see their loved one, especially around the holidays, if they've progressed through this disease. But what's really important to remember is they're still a person. The disease does not define who they are. And again, that's another important thing to keep in mind is that, before they were diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's disease, they were a person and they had all sorts of life experiences. And that doesn't change when you get a diagnosis of dementia. So again, that was just a quick overview before we really dive deeper into the holiday times and caring for someone living with dementia. And pre-pandemic, before social distancing and visiting restrictions, older adults and people living with dementia had varying experiences at the holidays. Some regularly got together with family members. They engaged in large family get-togethers, and some are more isolated. Perhaps they are living alone. Perhaps they're living in a senior living facility without a lot of family around. And so what's interesting about this year is that likely there's probably going to be more individuals that are isolated, or the caregiver and the care recipient, the person caring for someone living with dementia, and then that individual with dementia, they might be isolated together during this holiday season. So it's important that we just take a moment to think about, what was the holidays like pre-pandemic as we start to plan this pandemic, and the holidays during this pandemic. And also, as we consider a person's abilities with Alzheimer's disease or the progression through the disease, they may have really enjoyed a family gathering last year, but perhaps now they progress a little further into the disease, and so maybe a smaller gathering will be more inviting for them. It might just be a more comfortable environment. So we're going to be talking a lot about adapting the holidays to really align with the person's abilities and comfort level, because that really is, again, the cornerstone of person-centered care is tailoring the care and the situation to that individual. So we know that the holidays, there's so much going on typically, and there's lots of merriment and joy, but we can also find during the holidays that there can be too much of a good thing. It can be that way for the caregiver, and it can also be that way for the individual living with dementia. So again, for those living with dementia, it's really important to understand the limitations of the individual. And it's also important to recognize that routine can be very comforting and can also be really important to the individual living with dementia. So when we think about the holidays and activities, it's also important to think about that individual's routine, and can the activities be modified to fit within their routine. So for example, if they're always alert in the mornings and they like to take a nap in the afternoons, perhaps instead of a Christmas dinner or a Hanukkah celebration at night, maybe you consider more of a brunch time or lunchtime activity or get together just to accommodate that individual's routine and to keep them in that routine. And especially with the pandemic this year, it's really important to set realistic expectations for the holidays. It can be really tempting to hold on to those family traditions, but the reality is that the activity or tradition, it might not be an option this year because of the pandemic, or it might need to be modified based on the person living with dementia and their abilities. Another important thing to think about when it comes to the holidays is too much noise. Oftentimes, at least growing up at my family gatherings, there would be small children and the aunts and uncles chatting away, and there'd be music, and sometimes the TV would be on. And if you think about just how much noise that creates, for someone living with dementia, that might trigger a dementia-related behavior such as agitation or aggression. It just might be too much of a sensory overload. So this year with smaller gatherings, it's still important to consider the noise level, and perhaps instead of having the TV and the music on, maybe taking turning the music off and just having one of the two. You can kind of try it out to see if that makes the individual more comfortable. And also, too much noise can also prohibit conversation. As I mentioned earlier, communication becomes more challenging as the person progresses through the disease. And so making sure that the person can see who they're talking to, that they can not be distracted by other things so they can focus on that conversation, that can be really important in ensuring that that person is engaging socially in the event. So it could be that the individual feels more comfortable in a separate room of the house, and a couple people at a time come to visit with that individual so that there's not as many distractions, and everyone can really have a more meaningful conversation. Another thing around the holidays that's really easy to have too much of is sugar. I know I'm personally looking forward to all of the holiday cookies, but for a person living with dementia, or those older adults in our lives that have health issues, we want to be sure that we're not giving too much sugar, that we're continuing to stay hydrated and to take in nutritious foods. And also for family caregivers, it can be tempting to, if you're exhausted, to, have some sugar just for that kind of quick, boost of energy that it gives. But also caregivers need to be mindful of taking care of themselves. And also there's such a thing as too many visitors. This year, probably not necessarily the case for many, but we do want to make sure that, again, visitors, perhaps they come to visit at a time when the person is most alert, instead of during the nap time trying to adjust the routine. Again, make sure that that routine is maintained and that visitors are kind of woven into that routine, or perhaps it's more of a virtual visit this year. And then stress, especially for family caregivers. There's a lot of expectations at the holidays. Family caregivers often want to continue traditions, and it can just be a lot. And so family caregivers need to give themselves a break. It's okay if, we only make one type of cookie instead of the 5 types of cookies we typically make every year. Or, it's okay if we don't get the outdoor decorations put up and we just have a few indoor decorations. It can be challenging to adjust expectations in that way, but it can help to reduce the stress. And then also when we're caring for someone living with dementia, reminiscing is a great way to engage in conversation. But I think sometimes family members are quick to, correct the individual if they didn't get that memory right. Maybe they're telling a story and they said the wrong person, or they kind of got the facts mixed up. And that can be hard sometimes for family members to hear, but it can also be a little embarrassing for the individual to be corrected. So that's something to be mindful of when families are gathering. Maybe it's okay that mom or dad tells the story wrong. So again, that's just something to be mindful of. So some more tips for family caregivers around this time of year, some stress busters, if you will. Remaining flexible. We can have the best laid plans, but an individual living with dementia, I'm sure you've heard this phrase, if you've met one person living with dementia, you've met one person. And so each person will have, different dementia-related behaviors that they might exhibit. They might also, they definitely have different preferences. And so each person also day to day, one day they might have a really good day, and the next day they might have a few more challenges. So it could be that on the day of the celebration, the individual living with dementia wakes up and they're not feeling well, or something happens and maybe not everything that was supposed to get done that day got done. But that's okay. Again, we need to be flexible and also consider, of all those traditions, are there ones that are most important to continue? Are there some that we can adapt, or even some that we can just let go of this year? And maybe we can try to pick it up again next year. And then also, it's really important for caregivers to take care of themselves. I feel like I'm a broken record talking about this in a lot of my webinars, but it can't be understated. Caregivers, they have to take care of themselves so that they can continue to care for those in their lives. And so prioritizing self-care, while it can seem impossible at times, it is so important. So it could be that the caregiver gets some respite, some time away from the caregiving situation, but it could also just be little moments that the caregiver takes throughout the day. Maybe it's just going for a quick walk around the block, or pausing to take 3 deep breaths, or just vowing to drink 1 more glass of water today than I did yesterday to make sure I stay hydrated. Or maybe it's just turning on your favorite holiday song and sitting down and just really being present for that song. Those little things can sometimes go a long way in terms of self-care. And also, there's a lot of emotions that can come about around the holidays. So sometimes journaling, meditating, or even prayer can be a great way for caregivers to juggle and manage those emotions. And often caregivers have a hard time asking for help, but it's really important for them to be able to communicate their needs. Oftentimes, family members will say, is there something I can do to help? And caregivers, they say, oh, yeah, well, I'll let you know. Or they might personally think to themselves, well, I could delegate this, but it's probably just easier to do it myself. However, family caregivers can keep a list of, 3 to 4 things that someone could do for them the next time an offer for help is given. Then the caregiver can say, actually, yes, would you mind if it snows this winter, could you come shovel my driveway? Or, I have a hair appointment next Thursday. Could you please come to the house and be with my loved one while I go get that much needed haircut? Something of that sort. So having those couple things on hand can really help help a caregiver be more likely to delegate. And then this next one might seem a little silly, but look for comic relief. Nothing lifts the spirits like a good laugh. And during the holidays, there's no shortage of new movies. If you have ever tuned into the Hallmark Channel, I think they said there's like 25 new Christmas movies this year, which seems crazy to me that they could put together that many movies in such a short amount of time. But you could watch a Hallmark movie or a comedy, and maybe instead of being hung up on something that doesn't quite go your way, or if something happens, instead of getting upset about it, perhaps it's just easier to laugh it off. Have a good laugh about it. Can really help to lift the spirits. And then also planning ahead. Are there things that can be done a little bit over time? Can we plan ahead for maybe some meal delivery, or talk to the family ahead of time to create a plan and work towards that plan? Also make time for those traditions. I know caregivers often are really pressed for time, but if there's ways, small ways even, to honor those traditions, it can be helpful just to get people in the holiday spirit and to make sure that traditions are honored. I think in a year of uncertainty, 2020 has brought so much uncertainty, so much change. Our lives have, in a lot of ways, been flipped upside down. So these holiday traditions can really be a way to kind of ground us, to remind us that, there's a little sense of normalcy. So making time for those traditions can be helpful. And then also use your resources. I think if one thing the pandemic has taught us is that there's a lot of new convenience options for, grocery delivery, curbside pickup, a lot of great takeout. And so utilizing those types of resources can help to minimize stress around this time of year. And I've mentioned person-centered care a lot. And I know that this kind of speaks more broadly than to just the holiday time, but it can be helpful for family caregivers, and then also, again, those family members that maybe aren't around the individual as often, to really kind of understand what person-centered care means and why this approach really is proven to be most effective. The Alzheimer's Association, they recently updated their dementia care practice recommendations. If you're interested, you can go to their website to learn more. But really, the whole notion is to get to know the person. And often family members know the person better than anyone else. So that can go a long way in helping to personalize the care that the caregiver provides. And then also maximizing independence. Sometimes I've heard people living with dementia say, my loved one is so quick to assume I can't do it on my own. Yes, it may take me a little bit longer, but I can still do things for myself. So it's important to keep in mind. And also, allowing them to participate in the holiday festivities to the best of their ability can also help to provide a sense of purpose and help them to feel included. So family members, again, trying to, maximize the independence of the person, let them try it on their own, and then, ask if they need help and assistance, can, again, go a long way in helping them to feel like they still have some control over the tasks that they're doing. And then also practicing patience and compassion. I feel like this doesn't really need explanation, but this is, again, an uncertain year for all of us. I think we've all learned to be a little more compassionate towards one another, and we've all probably had to practice our patience a little more. I remember growing up, my mom always told us kids to practice our patience when we were in a situation where things maybe weren't going our way, and that's always stuck with me. So when we're working with individuals living with dementia, again, their brain isn't working the way it used to, and so it is important to just have a little more patience, especially when individuals trying to do something on their own, or maybe they're exhibiting a dementia-related behavior and the caregiver is getting frustrated, but we can just stop and take a deep breath, maybe count to 3, and then approach the situation again. That might be a helpful way for us to be a little more patient. And then also personalizing the care to meet the individual's needs and preferences. Again, that points to knowing the person, especially during this time of year. If you know that a cup of hot cocoa really solves all problems for this individual, that can be a great way to, redirect them if they're getting upset or agitated. You could say, you know what, I'm craving a cup of cocoa. Should we go into the kitchen and make one? Or, oh, I have just the desire to listen to Bing Crosby's Christmas album. It's my absolute favorite. If you know that person also likes that Christmas album or any other holiday album, you could turn that on to hopefully help provide a meaningful distraction from the situation or just a meaningful engagement. And then adjust the care approach to reflect the day-to-day needs and abilities. I was just talking earlier about how someone, their needs and abilities can change from day to day, and sometimes even from one moment to the next. So adjusting to meet them where they're at is really important. So some additional components of that person-centered care is to provide some ongoing opportunities for engagement that have meaning and purpose. And I think around the holidays, there's typically lots of festivities, so lots of opportunities for engagement. But when I say, engagement and activities, it doesn't always have to be, a puzzle, a craft, that sort of thing. Meaningful engagement could be also those activities of daily living or helping with small tasks around the house. Again, giving that person purpose and having them engage in something meaningful is really important. And again, knowing that person will help you kind of clue in to what is meaningful to them. So for example, if a person living with dementia, she always cooked the holiday meal. She was the one that, did the bulk of the cooking. Perhaps that's still meaningful to her. Maybe she can't, cook everything like she used to, but how can you engage her in the cooking process? Maybe you have her wash the vegetables, or maybe you have her stir the batter, or even just sit there alongside you and talk about memories of your favorite recipes and those types of things. That can be meaningful engagement. And then ensure coordination among all those that provide care, especially around the holidays. If you have other family members coming over and maybe staying at the house, or maybe providing the primary caregiver with a little respite, it's important to find a good way to communicate about the care of the individual. I know a lot of families use a journal. I know that's an approach we have at home, instead a record keeping of what the person likes. If the person's getting upset, they do love that cup of cocoa. Those little tips can help to provide that continuity of care amongst anyone that's involved in the care situation. And then all of these components of person-centered care really help to create a safe and supportive environment that reflects the person's characteristics, personality, and preferences. And again, this is important to keep in mind all year long, but especially can be helpful around the holidays. So I wanted to offer up a few more tips for family members, especially, again, for those that might not be around the individual throughout the year, or maybe, they haven't seen the person in a while. Some tips for engaging and perhaps redirecting if a dementia-related behavior starts to take place. So again, using the person's life story, getting to know them, what are their likes and hobbies. For example, if you know that the person living with dementia, he's always liked football. This time of year, there's fortunately lots of football on, or YouTube has footage of past games. If you start to notice he's getting agitated, you could redirect him to turn on a football game, or to talk about his favorite team and some of the memories he has of going to football games. So again, using those clues from their past, or those things that they really enjoy to provide better care for the individual. And then also be present in the person's reality. The individual could, depending on how far they're progressed into the disease, they might think that, they're celebrating Christmas on the family farm, and they might say something like, well, we need to get out and feed the horses. Instead of trying to correct that individual, you could step into their reality and say, oh gosh, I know Christmas time at the farm is my favorite. And, someone got up early this morning and the horses have been well taken care of, so no need to worry. But, what are some of your family farm memories, or what are some of your favorite memories from Christmas on the farm? Kind of redirect the conversation away from maybe that misperception into more of a conversation about fond memories. And then also avoid arguing. And this can be a lot harder said than done in a lot of situations, but arguing can quickly escalate to dementia-related behaviors such as agitation or aggression. So instead of arguing, you could try to redirect the conversation to something else, or you can apologize. Sometimes that can help to end an argument, is just to, even if nothing was your fault, to just say, I'm sorry, I misunderstood you, or I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that, or I'm sorry you feel that way. Sometimes just those two words, I'm sorry, can really go a long way. But what also can go a long way is compliments. Compliments can help to make a person feel really good, or can help them feel encouraged during an activity. You could compliment them on their Christmas sweater, or you could encourage them during an activity. Wow, you're really doing a great job of setting the table, something of that sort. You also want to avoid embarrassing the individual. For example, if they've spilled on themselves or if they've had an accident, don't blame it on the individual. You could instead, blame it on yourself. Say, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, I spilled on your shirt. Let's go get you changed. Or I just pulled a fresh pair of your pants out of the dryer. They're nice and warm. Let's go change you into that. So those kinds of things can, again, help to avoid embarrassing the person, especially in front of guests or company. You could also give simple choices. I like to give this example of when you're getting dressed, helping the person get dressed. You could still offer them choice on what they get to wear, but instead of opening up the entire closet and saying, what do you want to wear today? That might be too overwhelming. You could take out a red or a green shirt and say, which of these would you like to wear today? Again, that still enhances and helps to reinforce the independence of the individual, but allows them to, really choose what they want. Or, at lunchtime or at mealtime, maybe you're getting the big meal put together and you could say, would you like broccoli or green beans? And sometimes even showing them the two options can be helpful because they might not remember, the difference between the two. And then also set the person up for success. So if you are going to engage in an activity during the holidays, make sure that they have everything that they need to complete the task before you get started. That way they don't have to pause in the middle and get up to get something because they might forget, that they were doing a task, or they might get frustrated. And also you can give them instructions, one step at a time instead of putting together, a Christmas craft or whatnot. You could, just take it one little step at a time, and then that can help the individual complete the entire activity. Also, you can match the person's behavior. You can also do the task alongside instead of for them. So sometimes because of the way that dementia impacts the brain, a person might just need a visual trigger to remind them what the activity is. For example, brushing teeth. If you just kind of motion, the brushing teeth activity or do it next to them, do it alongside them, it might help to trigger. Or if the person truly can't do the activity, you can do a hand-under-hand approach to help them do that activity, but it still, keeps them a part of the activity. You can also redirect their attention to a hobby or an activity. I've given a few examples of that already. And then if the person is getting upset or agitated, it could be that something in the environment or the environment themselves might be overwhelming, overstimulating. So removing whatever it is in the environment that's making them upset, or removing them from the environment to maybe a quieter room can sometimes help to diffuse the situation. So I do want to provide a few more tips on that meaningful engagement that I've been talking about. Because when we think about meaningful engagement, remember I just referenced, it doesn't have to be a craft or a puzzle. You can engage people in various ways. You can engage them in physical activities. So maybe it's going for a walk outside if the weather's nice out, or even just getting up throughout the day to move their body. Also mental activities. Maybe they really like to organize or sort things. You could have them help to sort the holiday decor, or maybe doing puzzles is something that they really enjoy. And then there's also social engagement. It could be, setting up a Zoom call with family if it's not safe to have an in-person visit. It could also be, walking to a park or driving to a park and sitting on the bench and just kind of watching, the kids play on the playground and just watch the activity. That can be a form of social engagement. And sometimes the person might seem disinterested in the activity at first, but if you start the activity on your own and then ask them to join you, that again might just help them, see how you're doing the activity, help them to trigger their brain to do the activity alongside you. or ask the person to help you. Again, a person living with dementia still wants to have meaning and purpose. They want to feel wanted. So asking them to help you could be a great way to engage them in an activity. Again, you could give them simple instructions, one at a time, one step at a time. And you could also simplify the task. Instead of making it really elaborate, how could you simplify the task to make sure that that person can engage in the activity? A few more tips on meaningful engagement. Again, you can personalize it based on the person's life story. There's a caregiver that I worked with. A professional caregiver. He had a client who was a banker, and so this gentleman, he one day had just a jar of pennies, nickels, dimes, and quarters, and the caregiver decided, well, I know he loves to talk about money and finances because he's been a banker all of his life. So the caregiver just dumped that jar of coins on the table and started to sort them. And then the gentleman, joined in, was helping him sort. And that was a meaningful activity. And then, one day he said, well, I'll total up, the amount, and we'll see how much is in the jar. And so that became kind of a routine activity that was really meaningful to him because all of his life he had dealt with money. So you can think about, what was meaningful to them throughout their life, and how can you make that into a meaningful way to engage them. You can also use the 5 senses around the holidays. This seems to be easy to do. So for sight, you could drive around and look at holiday lights. For sound, you could listen to their favorite holiday tunes. For smell, you could, light a pine-scented or gingerbread-scented candle to bring about some good memories. For taste, you could make a familiar family recipe. And for touch, you could feel and touch the ornaments, the holiday decor, and engaging the 5 senses can be an especially helpful way to think about meaningful engagement, especially as a person progresses into the later stages of Alzheimer's disease, when maybe they aren't able to communicate as easy, or maybe they don't quite have the mobility that they once did. So that can be, thinking about activities through those 5 senses might be helpful. And then also, don't overthink it. Simple tasks can be turned into various activities. So I did want to go over just a few more holiday tips, of course, including the older adult or the person living with dementia in the festivities is really important because oftentimes they want to be included. Again, you might just have to modify. Also, celebrate those old traditions. In this pandemic, it might be a good time to create a new tradition and also redefine success. I gave the example earlier of, baking one type of Christmas cookie instead of 5 different types. Can that be a successful baking day? And also, making new traditions. Perhaps instead of creating the entire meal, that might be a little much, especially if it's a smaller group of people. Maybe it's focusing on 1 or 2 favorite dishes and then getting takeout for the turkey or something of that sort. So could you create a new activity? Also reminiscing about fun holiday memories, getting out photos, talking about favorite toys that you received as a kid. That can be a fun way to engage. But also, sometimes emotions come up during the holidays, especially if a beloved family member had passed away at this time of year, or even if they'd passed away years ago. Holidays is often a lot about family, and so that can bring up some emotions that are a little more sensitive. So just something to be mindful of. Of course, make modifications as needed. And then as caregivers, taking care of yourself so that you can provide your best self in the care that you're giving your loved one is important. I did put together just a quick list of some popular and economical gift items. I won't go through this in a whole lot of detail, but this can be helpful if you're kind of stuck on, what should I get my loved one? Especially if they're living with Alzheimer's or dementia, it might be hard to think of things that might be meaningful to them. So here's some ideas, and you can, of course, download these slides and reference this later if you're interested. But there's some things that might not make the holiday gifts list. You might be able to, spend time with the person. You could help them with their shopping. This year, you could help them do a lot of that online. You could have a wrapping day where you help them wrap and send packages, especially this time of year. If your family's not getting together, that might be a great option. Sending holiday greetings. Oh, I think that meant to say greeting cards. My apologies, typo there. But, cards are something that is so simple, but especially this time of year. I'm working from home, and I get excited when the mailman comes because it's kind of one of the limited interactions I get every day. So sending holiday greeting cards can be really special, especially in this year during a pandemic. Perhaps you plan a fun activity, and it could be something that's simple, but maybe you do designate an afternoon to just doing a few holiday-related activities. And also, it can be easy to get caught up in the gift giving and the food, but it's also important to celebrate the reason for the season. For many people, family is an important part of holiday celebrations. And also, many have religious ties to this time of year. So just taking time to also remember the reason for the season can be important. Also, focusing on others can provide that sense of meaning and purpose. Maybe there's a little service activity that you can do from the home, like writing thank you letters or holiday cards to the servicemen and women that are maybe serving across seas. Maybe you can kind of engage in an activity of that sort. Also, staying connected through, virtual visits and Zoom can be helpful, but also the old-fashioned telephone still works really well in keeping people together. So can you also give the gift of time? And maybe this year it can't be in person, but can you find other ways to give someone your time? So for the remainder, I do want to just kind of talk more about COVID-19 and how that's impacting family get-togethers. So when families are considering, do I get together? Do we not? Do we kind of have a really, really small, intimate gathering? It's important to consider the level of community spread where you live and also where guests might be coming from, especially if there's travel involved. Indoor risks or indoor gatherings pose greater risks. So consider, social distancing indoors, and also consider, how many people can you safely accommodate? Also, gatherings that last longer propose greater risk. So could it be that you modify family gatherings to be a shorter or more limited period of time? And then also considering requiring that safe behavior from all guests, during, before and after the event. So social distancing, wearing masks, and hand washing. And the CDC put out a great resource that kind of categorizes, the low risk, medium risk, and high risk activities. So here are what they consider to be those low risk activities. Having a small dinner with only the people that live in your household, preparing traditional family recipes for family or neighbors, and then, delivering them in a way that, doesn't involve contact. I've heard a lot of families talk about how, they're all going to make a dish, and then they're going to pre-portion it out for all the other families, and so they'll have a drop-off location, so then everyone's eating the same meal while they Zoom each other or connect virtually. So that's kind of one approach that I've heard people taking. Also, having that virtual recipe and maybe it's sharing new recipes could be a fun way to still create some holiday cheer, but in a safe way. You're shopping online instead of in person, and then, watching sports events and movies and parades from home instead of attending in person. So some moderate risk activities, having a small outdoor dinner with family and friends who live in your community. Of course, weather pending. A lot of us live in colder weather states, but you can lower your risk by following the CDC's recommendations for hosting gatherings, which are listed here on the screen. And probably at this point, everyone has heard them over and over again, so I won't go into too much detail. But then the CDC does say, these are some of the higher risk activities, going shopping out in crowds, going to public events, and having a large indoor gathering. So again, these are important things to keep in mind. It's important to communicate ahead of time. So notify family of plans in advance. And also you can update family on the individual's condition. A lot of times I've seen families put out an email ahead of time, something that is simple, but also can be helpful in just explaining the situation. So for example, an email could read, you may notice that mom has changed since you last saw her. Among these changes, you might notice that, and then you could insert a few changes, like maybe she's having more trouble following conversations, she's repeating herself more regularly, and then you could enclose a photo so that the family knows what she looks like, because again, the decline due to Alzheimer's disease might just alter the appearance a little bit. And so that way the family can be aware of that before they get to the event. So you could also, explain that she might not remember who you are or confuse you. Please don't get offended by that. It is issues that she's having with her memory, but we are very excited for you to come over. Could you please call when you're on your way, so that way I can make sure that mom is ready and that we're all ready. We're really excited to have you, but just wanted to give you these updates. So that would be a nice way to, again, update the family on the individual's condition. You could also provide a few helpful tips in that email. You can also share concerns ahead of time of the pandemic, and you can quote the CDC. You can go back to those guidelines. And the family caregiver is getting a lot of pressure from other members of the family that they want to see the person living with dementia. It can be a lot of pressure on that caregiver, so quoting those experts can help. And then also create a plan and set those expectations. You could say, we're excited to have everyone. We set up in the house so that everyone in the same household can eat at the same table, and we've distanced those tables 6 feet apart. And also, instead of hugs and kisses this year, we're going to be doing elbow bumps or air fives. So just kind of, again, setting those expectations. And then, consider virtual gatherings or drive-by parades or outdoor visits. And I do have some tips for that in just a few slides. Sometimes I'm not going to go through this slide today since I want to leave time for questions, but sometimes if the person living with dementia is still living independently, the holidays are a great time to kind of do an assessment of how the person's doing in that environment. So there are some physical, environmental, and emotional cues that you can look for on a visit. And if any of these are noticeable, it could be time for getting more help in the home, like professional home care that we provide at home instead, or another type of care, home health. It could also be just a sign that family should be checking in on this individual a little more frequently, or maybe there's home modifications that are needed so that the person can still remain safely in that environment. So happy to answer more questions about that at a later time via email or in the Q&A portion. But when we think about those tips for family gatherings, some of these tips are obvious. Choose the date and time ahead of time. Pick a platform that works for everyone and make sure that everyone can use the technology. I know some families have set up like kind of a test call before the day of, just to make sure that everyone can use the technology, and then communicate the plan. You can even set some ground rules, like mute unless you're talking, those types of things. And then you can also decide on a theme or an activity ahead of time, because sometimes it can be, I don't want to say awkward, but from time to time it can be a little awkward. It's not a normal way for us all to engage. So you could, have everyone share or show their favorite gifts that they got, or talk about old photos, or have old photos that they can share on the video, or talk about memories. You can even play a game, like name that holiday tune. So you can make it fun. And then, if a group video call might be overwhelming for the person living with dementia, you could consider those more individual calls, or even video calls or phone calls. And again, those drive-by parades have been a popular option as well for those that are able. So hopefully the tips that I've shared today can help to make the holidays enjoyable. Even though we all are living in unprecedented times, there's still ways that we can make the holidays special. There's ways we can modify activities to still include those that are living with dementia and their caregivers. And so I'll leave this resource slide up as we start to go through questions, but we have, the CDC guidelines. There's some caregiver resources up there. The area agencies on aging are always a great resource. GrandPad is a great technology device that might be an option for your family for video chats. And for those that are lonely, those family members that you feel are experiencing high levels of loneliness, there's a great website there. And then for those that maybe you're having issues communicating over the phone because of hearing impairment, especially during this year, looking into a caption call phone could be helpful. So with that, I'll open it up for questions, but I thank you all so much for joining me, and I wish you all a blessed holiday season.
Yes, Lakelyn, thank you so much. Great information. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. The first one being, do you have any suggestions for families/loved ones who have other families/loved ones in nursing homes? How do they celebrate together?
That is probably one of the most challenging parts of this pandemic is often there are visitor restrictions in nursing homes. And so, those restrictions are in place for important reasons. And, especially this time of year, I think, or I've talked to people in long-term care, and they're trying to find ways to get families connected. So you could inquire about setting up a video call on the day of the holiday, or, it doesn't necessarily have to be on the exact day. Or can you bring a care package to the person that's living in the nursing home? Even if you can't deliver it in person, could the staff deliver it? And could it have, cards from all the family and, the favorite Christmas cookies, or some way to commemorate the holiday season? But it is a challenging time. Could there be an opportunity for some sort of drive-by or signs or something of that nature? But I would encourage families to reach out to the communities. I know, again, a lot of long-term care communities are trying to get really creative and find ways to still keep people connected this holiday season, but really good question.
Okay. And then our next question is, do pets generally add a calming effect for the most part?
Yeah, that's a great question. We see, pets making a big difference. It really depends on the individual. So for some, it can be a calming effect. And for others, they might not have the same interest in pets. But if someone's always been a pet lover, I think that it can't hurt. I think it can only help. I actually did an entire webinar, I think it was in January of this year. The recording is still out there, I believe, on the ASA website and on the caregiverstress.com website. So I'd be happy to, my email's on this next slide. So if you would like to send me an email, I can send you a recording of that where I go over a lot more information on pets and pet safety and all of that good stuff. But it certainly can, and sometimes even like a robotic pet can be a great companion for someone if they cannot safely have a pet of their own.
Awesome. Well, we have just about 1 minute, so there's a couple of more questions that came in, but I believe Lakelyn will be able to email those answers out just so we can end on the appropriate time. So if you would like to claim CEUs for today's webinar, you will be receiving a follow-up email by the end of the business day that will contain a link to the CEU application that follows That follow-up email will also contain a link to today's slides. Please note you have 60 days to claim CEUs for today's webinar, and please note it will take an additional 30 days from the date of your submission in order for us to process and issue your CEU credits. I want to also just thank again, Lakelyn. Thank you so much for presenting this webinar. This was great information.
Thanks so much for having me, and wishing you all happy holidays. Take good care.
Yes. Thank you all for joining us, and that's today's webinar.